Having read the passage narrating from James Wood's How Fiction Works for my critical thinking and writing 1 class, I came across a concept I have been beating around for a while now. Free and direct style. This concept blurs the line between author and character. And after having a negative response to the Zavala household crime scene chapter, I want to test something. Some officers are gathered around a chess table by the door, their cameras flashing like paparazzi, something Carl is familiar with. Looking over their shoulders to see anything of note, he spots some chips in the table and a couple of the chess pieces broken in half. He raises an eyebrow, confused as to why something so minimal and insignificant as this table held so many of his colleagues' attention. He moves onward, heading over to a more modern entertainment area. Noting the difference in technology, he realizes how old this home feels. He's surrounded by lacquered wooden walls and lofty bookcases. The rug he's standing on is so faded it almost looks gray, and on top of it, a couple of love seats that look like 5 generations have sat on them consecutively, very 20th century. The most modern thing in the house that he's seen so far is a box TV, its broken screen displaying only static. As he nears it, the TV sparks, so Carl decides against his approach. Instead, he takes out a small camera from his belt, similar to the other officers, and takes a couple pictures to be logged as evidence. That's a paragraph from this piece with this bad reception. To be clear, it was only received badly to one person. It's just unfortunate that that's the person with a degree and is in charge of my grades, making her the authority on it. However, I also had an essay today that was presented to class. A different class, or at least, very least a different teacher. And although my essay was deemed as not much of an essay, there is something to be taken away from it. I was justifiably perplexed by this accusation claiming I had engaged in an act of hypocrisy that I could not identify. This is a sentence taken from that essay, and I believe it uses free and direct style very well. And I didn't even know that those 3 words belonged together when I wrote that sentence. My goal with the sentence was to portray my childish superiority at a small slight I felt I'd been dealt, which I'd blown up to seemingly larger importance in this essay. To portray this, I used more complex words than I had before the introduction of the sentence. The concept of more complicated words usually indicative of some superiority, perceived or legitimate, tracing back to when the higher-ups of society would be the only people who were educated. Instead of saying confused or off-put, I say justifiably perplexed. Not only do I claim that my perplexion is justifiable, but that it is perplexion, not alienation. For alienation would mean that I would be the other when I perceived myself to be the norm and those around me as the other. Saying that I was justifiably perplexed not only expresses my mystification, but also expresses that I wholeheartedly believed myself to be in the right and simultaneously better. And just there, I'm getting the hang of this. Using words like alienation, mystification, and simultaneously to discuss the matters of a child in an essay written for a class is indicative of the same thing the child was feeling, a sense of superiority. Of course, I'm playing it up here, pretending to feel superior by writing a whole document on this topic when I don't need to, for a reading I didn't need to write about. The word accusation, well, it's accusatorial in and of itself. Claiming that I was being accused accuses the accusers of accusing, and the repetition of accuse there is for comedic effect, thank you very much. Also, an accusation carries much more weight than the original cry of hypocrite. Accusations are for lawyers and Puritans, not for little kids. Saying j'accuse is not entirely appropriate here. But from the little child's perspective that I'm trying to show, it's entirely appropriate. I'm feeling like I was on the receiving end of a pointed finger of a Frenchman citing treason. The use of the word claiming is very intentional too. A claim is quite different from the statement of fact. I could have said saying I had engaged in to the same literal effect. To use claim, however, creates a different meaning to it. Claiming indicates my stance against the claim, invalidating the other kid's stance in both the narrator's and reader's eyes. That's my claim, at least. Engaged is a very active word. Instead of passively being a hypocrite, I engaged in an act of hypocrisy. The phrasing here forces me into an action of which was clear I had not committed, since the reader had only just spent a paragraph with me tracing my steps as I took a detailed journey across the sidewalk. Across the sidewalk, there's gotta be a better way to say that. To engage in something is to take an active role in it, and since it was clear I hadn't, this brings us back to delegitimizing the aforementioned accusation. An act of hypocrisy. No, it wasn't just me simply being a hypocrite, it was an act of hypocrisy. Much more severe of an accusation. The way I phrased it, you'd think I'd been called before a jury, having been charged with an act of high treason. Which is how little me felt about it, and still do to some extent in similar situations to this. Nothing angers me more than claiming, here I go again, that I had done something that I hadn't done. So being called a hypocrite was, in my mind, on the same level as being my cousin Vinny and being charged with a murder I didn't commit. And engaged in an act of hypocrisy instead of being called a hypocrite is a subtle way to express those feelings. I was justifiably perplexed by this accusation, claiming I had engaged in an act of hypocrisy that I could not identify. This sentence probably looks a whole lot different now, after all that over-examination. I had written that sentence with not a single fraction of a thought floating around in my head about free indirect style. And I think it turned out spectacularly, so much so that halfway into this reading, I had to stop to write this, and my mind immediately going to these 2 projects I presented today. So I'm going to go through and fix up this paragraph. Here it is again. What does Carl think about these officers? The answer to that question will determine the synonym for the verb gathered. Earlier, Carl refers to the cops outside as milling about, so he's not the fondest of them. And as the author, I know he doesn't have complete faith in their ability. In the same vein as milling about, flocking together could be good. Some officers flock together around the chess table. I think flock is good, but something is rubbing me the wrong way about together about in that sentence. It feels a little clunky. A complete restructuring may be in order. A bunch of officers seem to have flocked to a solitary chess table. I like this a lot better. Not only is it the same disregard towards these officers kept, some becoming a bunch, seem adds a sense of theorizing to the sentence, which makes sense, since this scene is about Carl looking for clues and trying to make deductions. I do like flocked. I think it's a good word to use there. Gotta remember to take my source. The article choice here, I go on and on about article choice. I didn't just wrote an essay about article choice right before writing this. Is important. It's a solitary chess table and not the solitary chess table. Carl is going into this already regarding this as unimportant, so it's just a table to him. Solitary helps to create the image of the scene. 5 or more full-grown men peering at a single table, very little surrounding it, it's just a table. And Carl's looking at them, and as is mentioned later, is above them in height, which serves double as him seeing himself as above them. In a different scene with Carl at the end of the story, he sits down at a table to talk to his family, which humanizes him. He's the tallest one there, so by getting on their level, by shortening himself, he is getting off this high horse, so to speak. He also does this later in the scene when he wants to openly empathize with the witness, so he sits down next to her. I think looking over their shoulders could do with a tune-up. Making it looking over them establishes a clearer sense of superiority there, while sticking to the general form of the expression. It also makes him seem taller, which was the point of the original line. Broken is too active of a word to fit here. Even though it's past tense, the act of something breaking is more dramatic than something chipping, which is another verb used in that sentence. Snapped, while it is more descriptive, is also a bit too active. Split is overall better. Saying something has been split in half is much less active than it being broken. Having gone on a whole rant about confusion and perplexion earlier, maybe confused should be changed here. Baffled could be good, but at a loss seems better. While bafflement is a picturable emotional moment, it is a bit too extreme for the normally reserved Carl, especially when the central theme of this piece is restraint. At a loss shows that he simply can't think of why, and this is leaving him feeling like he's lost or missed something. The hammering in of minimal and insignificant here is good. I didn't intend for this, but the multiple adjectives serve to make Carl seem like he's belittling this table, making sure it is inferior to him as he towers above it. Colleagues here is too close for Carl, especially after he referred to these guys as a bunch of officers a couple sentences ago. I named them thusly to indicate that they share the same profession, but I don't think that's necessary. It's pretty obvious given the context that came before this paragraph that Carl is a police officer, and we've established that these guys are also officers. So instead of colleagues, I could just say these men. Now I don't think attention works that well. Attention is too general. There's no indication that they are paying full attention to the task. Focus could work, as this table demanded the focus of these men. Originally, I thought moves onward was a good way to describe Carl's movement, but now I'm thinking it creates too much of a linear path, makes the journey forward seem too arduous. I think walks farther in could work better, since it describes him entering the house to a greater extent than the other officers, while also showing movement without much strain. Just a minor thing about this rug line here. Rugs can be gray without being faded. I just realized that I might need some more clarity there. These last couple lines I was told someone loved, so I don't want to change too much there. I was also told that the last clause could use some work. I think we can remove this clause from the sentence altogether and leave it be on its own. Maybe sizing up this pitifully small TV, Carl snaps a few pictures of it, trying to get the best angle. He'll remember to log it in as evidence later. Seems pretty useless to vandalize the TV, as archaic as this one is, when you could pawn it off, so the destruction of this device could provide an identity on the perps. Words like pitifully and archaic demonstrate Carl's disapproval of the TV. The line, he'll remember to log it in as evidence later, is purposefully phrased. There's a line earlier in the piece about a cigarette butt, where he thinks about how he'll talk to a witness about it, saying he'll have to remember to. He never does in this chapter, so this phrase on later rereads is supposed to signify that he might not remember to log in these pictures either. The formality of destruction of this device, when compared to perps, is a stark difference. It shows that Carl, although he doesn't care about the TV itself, cares about the crimes committed, and not the criminals themselves, already seeking to dehumanize them with this simplified monosyllabic word. It's also a pretty cinematic word, and since Carl sees himself as the hero in this piece, which is why he's been trying to crack the case with his theory on getting the suspects' identities, I think it sets up that thread very well. For when he realizes that he's not supposed to break the case wide open within 2 minutes of showing up on the scene like the detective protagonists he sees on TV. Rereading this paragraph we've been working on, there's a few extraneous things I can quickly fix up, so I'll do that now and then voila. A bunch of officers seem to have flocked to a solitary chess table by the door, their cameras flashing like paparazzi, something Carl is familiar with. Looking over them to see anything of note, he spots some chips on the table and a couple of the chess pieces split in half. He raises an eyebrow at a loss as to why something so minimal and insignificant as this table demanded the focus of these men. He walks farther in, heading over to a more modern entertainment area. Noting the difference in technology, he realizes how old this home feels. He's surrounded by lacquered wooden walls and lofty bookcases. The brown rug he's standing on is so faded that it almost looks gray. And on top of it, a couple of love seats that look like 5 generations have sat in them consecutively. Very 20th century. Out of everything in this outdated household, a box TV is the most modern, so to speak. It sits proudly on a little TV stand in the center of this modern entertainment area. And like this chess table, the box TV is also broken. Its rounded screen displays only static. As he nears it, the TV sparks, so Carl decides against his approach. Instead, he takes out a small camera from his belt, similar to the other officers. Sizing up this pitifully small TV, Carl snaps a few pictures of it, trying to get the best angle. He'll remember to log it in as evidence later. Seems pretty useless to vandalize a TV, as archaic as this one is, when you could pawn it off, so the destruction of this device could provide an identity on the perps. It's not the most dramatic difference, but it's the little things. I do really like flocked. Really gives Carl's perspective on the other officers more clarity. And I think my expansion on the evidence line into 3 sentences should suffice for anyone who thought it was too simple before. And that's free indirect style. Even in third person, it really makes it feel like your character is telling the story here, and not the author. The professor had a complaint about one part, with a piece of evidence being revealed through dialogue, that she felt the author bear. Although I disagree, I think it was naturally brought up as a clue for later in the book. I believe I could highlight Carl's perspective more here. So hopefully I did. We'll see how it works. Well, that's it for me. So until next time, adieu.